Hello and welcome to my channel. I have another drawing of a Star Wars villain. This is Darth Maul from the prequels, and it was done in a slightly different combination of pencils, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So let me show you how it was done. The size of the paper is 9 times 12 inches. The paper is about 220 GSM smooth drawing paper, and my drawing tools will be a combination of colored pencils and charcoal. So my idea here was to draw a black and white drawing, with only the red parts in color. And for this I needed, of course, red colored pencils, but I also decided to use a black colored pencil as well as charcoal in various forms and shapes. I started out by shading some of the background with a piece of vine charcoal. The background needs to be a bit darker so that I can create contrast with the upper part of Darth Maul's head, which will be lighter because the light source is coming from above. So there's going to be some contrast there. I'm going to blend that, or rather smudge that around with a brush and a tortillon, depending on where I want to use it. For the larger areas I mostly use a brush. For these smaller areas where I want to go in with a little more precision, I use tortillons, and later, of course, I cleaned up the edges using a combination of pencils and erasers. Now, my idea, like I said, was to shade everything the way I normally would if I worked in charcoal, but to add a touch of color to those red parts. So I was hoping that this would create a nice contrast, and that those red areas would stand out nicely and capture the attention of the viewer. So Darth Maul is an interesting looking character, kind of menacing looking, with the horns and the weird red and black pattern on the face, and the red eyes. It's from the first prequel, where he was sadly killed by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi seems to have taken out most of these villains that I draw recently. But anyway, let me get back to explaining the drawing process. I'm going to be using charcoal pencils here, and I'm using woodless charcoal pencils. I'm using Worris and woodless charcoal pencils, and I'm using Polychromos, and I don't know which the other one is, colored pencil. So I'm using mostly Faber-Castell colored pencils, and I'm using these woodless charcoal pencils. I don't think the brands are very interesting here. You can do this with any brand of charcoal pencil or any brand of colored pencil. I think what's more interesting is the combination, because what charcoal will allow me to do, it'll allow me to create nice gradients, nice transitions when shading. And this is something that would be a little bit difficult to do if I were doing all of this in color. And it's going to make a shading process a lot easier, and then it's also going to allow the colored parts to be applied more easily and to stand out in contrast against the black and white areas. I've done quite a number of those black and white drawings with a touch of color. I don't really know where I've seen that first. I think it may have been from from an artist called John Di Biasi, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he does a lot of fan art. I've seen his art on Instagram. He does a lot of portraits from the movie characters, sitcom characters, and stuff like that. And what I've seen in many of his drawings, in a lot of his artwork, is a combination of black and white and color, black and white drawings with some color details. And I really like the idea, and I've been doing that for a number of years now. I've actually done that with quite a few of my Star Wars drawings, and I've done a lot of Star Wars artwork. Most of the artwork I've done was black and white, and some of it was with some touches of color here and there. And I remember that this other time when I was doing a drawing of Star Wars villains, I think Darth Vader and Darth Maul and some others were there, and I also did a combination of black and white and red. Because there is a lot of red color with a lot of these villains, because of the red lightsabers and some of the other details. Anyway, I started with the ear and the horns, and then I'm shading some of these lighter areas, and then I'm going over them with a red colored pencil. I'm going to be covering this kind of carelessly. I'm not going to worry too much about texture, because I'm going to be blending over it with a white colored pencil. I actually used a white colored pencil here a lot, and I'm going to explain how I used it, because I used it both for blending and for making some of the areas a little bit lighter. So the prequels, in case you don't really know what I'm talking about, there was the original trilogy, the Star Wars movies, those mostly followed the adventures of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, while the prequels mostly focus on Anakin Skywalker, Luke's father, and how he became Darth Vader. And Darth Maul is one of the villains in the first movie, and he wielded double lightsaber, double-edged, or a double lightsaber. Kind of looks like a lance of some sort. I suppose it was very cool at the time. I wouldn't know. I'm not a great fan of the Star Wars universe, and as I've mentioned a number of times, I only really like the original trilogy. Not that the prequels are that bad. They're okay, I guess. It's just that I'm not a great fan. Most of these drawings I did recently were commissioned drawings. I did like the challenge of drawing some of these characters, but when I can choose naturally, most of the time I will do either a landscape or wildlife. Now you see here, if you want to capture volume or shape of this person's head, we need to have a range of value, lighter and darker areas. Now I can't really hope to capture the exact texture of the skin, and I'm not really too bothered about that, honestly. There's going to be some texture anyway, which the pencils will naturally produce in the combination with the paper. But what I need to worry about is that some parts of his head need to be lighter and others need to be darker. And that also applies to the red areas, not just the black areas. So you can see that I created some lighter areas using a combination of two approaches. First, a bit of erasing or applying a little bit less of the red pencil, but also using a white colored pencil. Now, a white colored pencil can make areas which you've already covered with the other colored pencils, it can make them a little bit lighter. But what it also does, it blends and burnishes the surfaces. And what you need to do is you need to try to control your pressure. Because when you use less pressure, you will actually tend to blend a little bit, removing some of the texture you may not like, and making the area a bit smoother with a little bit better coverage. But if you use a bit more pressure and if you use a sharp pencil, especially these Faber-Castell polychromos pencils, you will be able to put some lighter areas on top of the darker ones. It's not really common that you can work from dark to light with colored pencils. I'm not really saying you can do that. You can't add lighter details, but you can, by using a bit more pressure, you can actually make some areas a bit lighter, which you see that I did on a part of his forehead and the top of the head. Now I should probably say a few words. By the way, I'm working on the eye and I zoomed in a little bit so that you can see some of the details. You can see a small catch light in to the left. I'm going to shade around it so that that lighter portion, that highlight, would stand out. I should probably say a few words about the light source. The light source is coming from above, but it's coming more from the left. So the left side is going to be the shadow side here, as is often the case, or at least as is the case in all of those cases when the light source is not coming from the right. So now it's coming from the left, and that means that the right side is going to be darker, but because the light source is coming mainly from above, the upper part of the head, the dome, will be a lot lighter than the rest of the face and the head. Now what's making my job a little bit more difficult is this pattern, this black and red pattern, and I can't allow it to distract me too much or to confuse me, because I still need to try to be aware of the relationships between lighter areas and shadow areas. I need to be aware of where the light side is and where the shadow side is, which parts of the face are protruding and which of them are kind of deeper in the shadow, and I need to be able to explain all of those relationships in order to explain the shape to the viewer. Because if I just focus on the pattern, the black and white, and those shapes, I will not be able to create something, a face that looks realistic, that appears to have volume and depth. I won't be able to do that. So while I'm drawing these weird patterns on Darth Maul's face, I'm always trying to think about which part of the face is lighter, where is there a little bit more shadow, where do we have highlights and things like that. Now back to what I was saying about my charcoal pencils. So I'm using woodless charcoal pencils, and I'm using two grades of these, a medium one and a soft one. The medium one is my main drawing tool, and I'm using that for most of the shading process. But I also use the soft one, which is a little bit darker, and I'm using that for the darker bits. And I'm trying to use the soft charcoal pencil sparingly so that it's more effective that way, so that I can have a nice range of value where these smaller portions of really dark value add some extra depth to my drawing. So I did a bit more work here to the left, working on his robe. There are lots of folds there and some kind of a hood, and right now once I shaded that with charcoal, I'm going back with a pencil eraser and pulling some highlights so that these folds in the robe would stand out a bit more, and so that they would look more three-dimensional, and so that I could stay a bit more consistent with the light source, because light source is coming from above, so all of these areas around the neck and the shoulders, which are kind of facing towards the light source, are going to be lighter. And I can also use that pencil eraser to add a bit of texture to that cloth, to make that look a bit more realistic and a bit more interesting, because I don't want it to appear too smooth. I'm moving on, and I made a mistake here around the nose. I had to make some corrections because I didn't really understand how many of these squares I needed on the middle of the face, on the middle of the nose. So this was kind of a process where I did a bit of black and white drawing, and then a bit of coloring, and then a bit of shading of those colored parts. Now, as you can see at the top of the head, both the black and the red are kind of fading, and to make that a bit smoother, I even used a bit of white colored pencil. I used a couple of reds. I'm not really sure why I did that, but I liked the combination of these two. They are slightly different in color. One of them is Faber-Castell, the other one is Maped, I think. But it doesn't really matter. Like I said, if you're the kind of person that's obsessed with particular brands, then I'm not going to be very useful to you, because I don't really care too much about the brands, and my advice is always use whatever you have, use whatever you like. So you can see I did a bit of additional shading over some of the shadow areas in those red areas, to make them a bit darker, and to make some indications of maybe some wrinkles in the skin and things like that. So now I'm slowly moving sorry about that. I'm moving on to the right side of the face, and there will be some interesting things here, because this is the shadow side. It needs to be considerably darker than the left side. The eye will have to be darker. Even the white of the eye is going to have to be a lot darker. This black pattern will have to be darker. Even the red parts will have to appear darker, so I'm going to have to shade those as well. I'm doing a lot of work here now with a soft charcoal pencil. Now, I know I said that I was going to use it sparingly, but the thing is that I did most of the shading on the left with medium charcoal pencil and black color pencil. So here I'm trying to add a bit more of those soft charcoal pencil details. So I guess you could say that in this drawing I used the soft charcoal pencil a little bit more. But you'll see I won't be using only a soft charcoal pencil for these black parts. I will actually use a combination of soft charcoal pencil and a medium charcoal pencil. For erasing, I don't know if I mentioned that, but I'm using a Kohinoor pencil eraser and a Faber-Castell kneaded eraser to take away value as needed or where needed. And these two seem to be working pretty well. For blending, I mostly use brushes, but also tortillons here and there. For the background, I used brushes and even my fingers. For shading, like I said, I used charcoal pencils and colored pencils, but I also used vine charcoal. I find that vine charcoal is a nice addition to other charcoal drawing tools, because it's so easily moved around, it's easily blended. So I think if you like drawing in charcoal, I think you should definitely use a vine charcoal in addition to the charcoal pencils. Now here I'm actually going to shade this right side of the head. I'm using the charcoal dust from those darker areas and pushing it around, shading some of these areas and adding even a little bit more of vine charcoal where needed. Why did I do that? Because I obviously want that part of the face to be darker. So it's kind of like an undertone here, and I'm going to be adding color to that darker undertone. Now that's going to modify the color slightly, but that's why I have two reds to make sure that my color is closer to the color that I have on the left, but at the same time considerably darker. And I'm establishing a nice contrast between the light side and the shadow side. A couple more horns here on the other side as well. I need to try to make sure there is contrast between the lighter parts of those and the background, just like I did with the ones on the left. I'm going to make these a bit darker, but the upper edge needs to be lighter, and for that I need to shade the background. Make it a little bit darker, and then define the edge between those horns and the background. Notice that I also added a bit of charcoal powder to the top part of the drawing to make that a little bit darker. And now I'm back to working on this area around the neck, adding a bit of darker value, because both the face and the robe is casting a bit of shadow onto that area, and that's going to be a bit darker. So after that, once I've defined the shape or the outer edge of the jaw and the chin, I'm moving on to the mouth and kind of drawing that line of the upper lip and then just shading around it. The cheek on the left needs to remain a bit lighter. I'm going to make the other one a bit darker, and just adding some of those weird patterns around the mouth and the nose. The nose itself is pretty dark, but I still need to explain its shape and create a range of value and create some contrast between the lighter areas and darker areas. So I'm going to do the nose in a combination of a medium pencil and a soft charcoal pencil. But I'm just drawing more and more of these dark areas, of these black areas, because I feel that this is kind of helping me. It's helping me with my motivation, and it's helping me with the just with making progress a little bit quicker, because that way I just sort of define the darkest areas, and then I can focus on the midtones. So I blended the charcoal on this left cheek a bit more, made it a little bit lighter, I guess, and now I'm working on the nose. It looks pretty dark, but I'm going to be adding some even darker areas to it. So this is an interesting character design. I read that a lot of Star Wars fans wanted this character to have some kind of a spin-off, or to make a new appearance, a reappearance. I don't know if that's possible, considering the fact that he died in the first episode, but who knows. You can see how I'm shading the area under the cheekbones, making that a little bit darker. I shaded the right side of the nose a little bit, making that a bit darker, and now I'm kind of defining the jaw a little bit. And after that, it's time to shade using my red colored pencil to cover more of these areas with a red color. You can see that some of it is already starting to be a little bit darker because of the underlayer, because of the shading that I've done under the colored pencil. If I feel like I need to remove a little bit of that and remove a bit of value, that's not a problem. I can just remove a little bit with an eraser and just go over it with a white colored pencil. But here I'm really trying to define specific parts of the face, specific facial features, and to give the face a little bit more volume. And I'm using a lot of white colored pencil for that purpose. To make this a little bit better, I need to keep resharpening my colored pencils every now and then. They don't have to be super sharp, but shading works better when they're sharp. If you're wondering if the white colored pencil is burnishing the paper, it's not too bad, and it helps when you're using a thicker paper that can take a little more abuse. But it does burnish the paper a little bit. Like I said, you need to control the pressure and decide for yourself what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to blend a little bit, just a little bit of light pressure will do the trick. If you want to make some areas lighter, you can use a little bit more pressure. You can maybe use an eraser to remove a little bit of that color, or charcoal, whatever it is that you're working on, and then go over it. Now, if I were doing this in full color, the background would have been brownish, and the eyes would also have a bit of yellow in them, and the robe wouldn't be completely grey. Obviously there would be some other tones, but I really like this idea, this combination of black and white with the red details. So I stayed consistent with that, and I think it worked. I'm pretty much wrapping things up here, at least with the face. I'm shading the right side of the face, using a bit more of that soft charcoal pencil because that part needs to be a bit darker now. I'm going to have a lighter part of his jaw all the way to the right, so that I can maybe make it look like a bit of a reflected light coming from the other side. And I'm gonna finish the background here on the right as well. I did that again with a piece of vine charcoal and blending that with a brush, and then with a larger brush, and later I'll just clean up the edge between these horns and the top of the head and the background. So I removed the tape at the top. My drawings are normally taped down to a piece of cardboard, so I had to smooth that out a little bit. And I'm just gonna finish the drawing by drawing the rest of the robe here on the right. I'm first going to use a soft charcoal pencil to define some of the shapes, some of the larger shapes, and then do a bit of shading in between them. I'm trying to create a bit of contrast between the robe and the face. I want that part is in the shadow, but I still want the face to stand out, and I also, even though this is all pretty dark, I still want some shapes to be visible. So I'm blending that with a combination of brushes in my finger, and pulling some highlights with an eraser. Finally, I'm just going to put down my signature in the lower right corner using that same pencil eraser. And I think the drawing is now finished. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I have lots of Star Wars artwork if you want to check that out. I have other drawings as well, obviously. If you want to see longer videos, go to my Patreon. I want to thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. The next one is probably not going to be Star Wars related. Bye for now.